Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Welcome back to Southeast Radio's Business Matters with me, Karl Fitzpatrick. Brian Caulfield has an accomplished career as both a tech entrepreneur and a venture capitalist. And he joins me now to share his experience and insights with us this morning. Brian, you are a venture partner with Draper Esprit, but you're also known as a tech veteran. Perhaps you can tell our listeners about this particular aspect of your career.
If I go back to the beginning, originally I'm a computer engineer. After I graduated, I spent a couple of years doing postgrad research in Trinity. Briefly had a real job, but only briefly, working for a Swiss multinational. And then around about 1992, I co-founded my first startup, and altogether I've been a co-founder of 3 different tech startups, two of which have been lucky enough to exit from successfully, and one of which sadly failed. So before I was ever involved in the venture capital industry, I was a founder of startups. So that's really the background.
Now, a common trend and theme here in Ireland is an entrepreneur comes up with an idea for a business and they fast forward to get that business up and running as soon as possible without doing a feasibility study. What are your thoughts on this?
I am a huge believer in the idea of kind of lean innovation. And I definitely think that before you build anything from a product perspective, you should be testing demand in the market. And, there's a number of ways that you can do that. You can go out and directly talk to potential customers, and you definitely should do that. And you can also do things like spend a small amount of money on Google keyword advertising to see if there's latent demand for the product that you plan to offer. Are there people who are actually doing Google searches looking for what you plan to deliver? So there are a number of things like that you can do, and definitely I think people should be doing those things before they start writing code or building product.
Now, Brian, you have previously stated that Ireland is a great place to be a startup company, but it is a dreadful place to be an entrepreneur. What led you to draw such a conclusion?
I suppose really what I was saying was that it's a great place to be a company in general. If you look at the Irish business environment, it's very easy to set up a company. If you compare that side of things with other countries, it's an awful lot easier to establish a business here. Once you are established, the kind of the level of regulation and the ease of doing business with the tax authorities and so on is pretty good. Our corporate tax rates are obviously very low, and these things are all part of the mix in terms of our attractiveness to foreign direct investment, and obviously that's been a very, very successful strategy for Ireland. When you look, however, at an individual entrepreneur, or when you look at people who are sort of working in very, very risky early stage businesses, the tax treatment of those people is very, very unfavorable, in spite of kind of what people might believe to the contrary. An entrepreneur pays more tax, not less, than a regular PAYE employee. Especially if you're fortunate enough to make more than €100,000 a year. Capital gains tax is very, very significantly higher than it is in the UK. The tax treatment of share options is in many respects extremely unfair. And, that's really what I was getting at. I think Ireland has come a long way in terms of, if you like, celebrating our entrepreneurs and recognizing that entrepreneurs are a very, very important and valuable part of the community, creating jobs and creating opportunity for everyone. But there is still a little bit of an attitude of, we want you to build a great and successful business, but God forbid that you should make any money out of it.
So in your opinion, and on the topic of tax, what do you think the government need to do to both income tax and capital gains tax for entrepreneurs?
So in terms of income tax, I think all that we can ask as entrepreneurs is that we're treated the same as everybody else in the tax code. So, I think we need to equalize the entrepreneurial tax credit with the PAYE tax credit. We need to eliminate the 3% USC supplement above 100,000, so that from an income tax perspective, an entrepreneur is treated the same as any PAYE worker. And, of course, everybody would like to see taxes go down, but I think the starting point ought to be equality of treatment. In relation to CGT, I think we need to have a distinction in the tax code between gains that come from the blood, sweat and tears of building a business and purely speculative gains. So if I'm honest, I don't really have a big problem with CGT at 33% on gains that are kind of purely speculative. But if somebody quits their job, potentially goes without salary for several years, pays themselves peanuts for a period of years in order to build a business which subsequently employs many people and, creates real value for society and for the community, that's something that we should be encouraging. So I'd like to see a reduced rate of CGT for entrepreneurs significantly beyond the kind of the current limits, so something closer to the UK scheme where the first 10 million of capital gains are taxed at 10%. In relation to share options, much of what needs to be done is actually administrative and doesn't in fact relate to tax rates. It's more about making the system fair so that people aren't being asked to pay tax on money that they haven't received and might never receive. And again, ideally, I would like to see the rate of tax applying to gains from share options reduced. But at the very least, it should be set at the CGT rate, regardless of circumstances.
Now, as I've already mentioned, you are a venture partner with Draper Esprit, but in 2016, you spearheaded the flotation of the company on both the Dublin and London stock exchanges. Provide us with an insight into this experience, and what advice would you be able to impart to anyone who is considering going down this particular route?
So I think the first thing I'd have to say is that obviously what we were doing was really relatively unique in that we were IPOing a technology investment business. And that made the period leading up to the IPO itself very, very tough indeed, because we were having to explain to the market, if you like, what we did, what our business model was, and, how they should think about the business. So the process to get to the IPO was very, very tough. Having said that, I mean, since the IPO, I have to say that things have gone extremely well, and it's probably fair to say that it's gone about as well as we could have hoped so far in terms of the progress that the business has made. I think one of the things that has been a revelation for me is just the access to capital and how, if you like, how relatively speaking easy it is if you've got a solid business proposition to raise capital in the public markets. Having said that, you have to have a certain scale to the business. I think it's a big mistake to IPO a business that doesn't have sufficient scale and that doesn't have, if you like, sufficient predictability in terms of its revenue and its performance, and that perhaps might not also have the kind of the depth in the team to enable you to actually deal with the mechanics of being a public company and continue to build a business at the same time. So I think it's a great option for businesses that have gotten to that scale. Great option for founders who want to be able to deliver liquidity for themselves and their employees and their investors, but also wants to be able to kind of retain control of the business and continue to grow the business. So I think the current markets are pretty difficult, but I think globally speaking, we're going to see more businesses going public over the next number of years.
And as a venture capitalist, you have the experience of being both the investor and the investee. So with that in mind, what are you looking for in investment proposals?
So I think the first thing that we're always looking for is large market opportunities. And, to me, a market opportunity, if you like, is an unsolved problem. So the first thing that I want any potential investee company is to sell me on the existence of a big unsolved problem. And if you can convince me of that, then I'm interested in hearing more about how you solve the problem and so on. The second thing that you really want to see in a potential investee company is, if you like, a differentiated take on the market, a view on that market opportunity that is, if you like, here's why all the other guys are getting it wrong, and here's what we're going to do that's different, that's going to enable us to succeed in the market. It's always a great thing when you feel that the entrepreneur has an insight into the market that other people don't have. Beyond that, you're always looking for great people. You want a management team that is coachable, as we say. A team that will listen to the input of an experienced investor, but also will argue the toss. You're not looking for a management team that's just going to be compliant, but you do want a management team that will listen and take on board the input that you have. And you also want a management team that you're going to be able to work with from the perspective of their integrity, their trustworthiness, their openness. I think one of the mistakes that many entrepreneurs make, especially with venture capital investors, is that they frankly want them to sort of hand over the cash and, get out of the way, and that's not really the way the model works. Venture capital investors believe that they can add value to the businesses. They want to have a role in helping to develop the business, helping to hire the right people, helping to define the right strategy, not in the day-to-day operations, but in the the strategic direction of the business.
And from your experience, Brian, what are the common mistakes that entrepreneurs make when they approach venture capital companies like your own?
I think there are a few things. The first thing is not selling the problem. I mean, I would always say to entrepreneurs, sell the problem, not the solution. Because if you can convince me about the existence of the problem, then we've got something interesting to talk about. In the technology space especially, a lot of entrepreneurs will tend to focus on the technology, and it's not unusual to have an entrepreneur sort of saying to you, the technology can do this, and the technology can do that. And that's always very worrying for an investor. An investor really wants to know that you're driven by the market opportunity, driven by the problem. I think the other mistake that companies will frequently make is they don't think carefully enough about the right fit between their business and investors. Investors are not all the same, and businesses are not all the same. And you need to make sure that the investor and the business are compatible. So, for example, in our case, in Draper Esprit, we want to invest in businesses that we believe can exit for an absolute minimum of 9 figures. We need to believe that the company is going to be sold for 100 million, 200 million or more. We don't always get there, of course. But, if a company approaches us with a business plan that, clearly demonstrates that they're never going to get there, then they're probably talking to the wrong investor. And I think that's generally a big problem, that people aren't careful enough about segmenting the universe of investors and kind of saying, okay, these are the type of investors that are most appropriate for my business.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was venture partner with Draper Esprit, Brian Caulfield. And I would like to thank Brian for sharing some valuable advice with us this morning. We're almost at closing time here now at Business Matters, but before we go, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my production team, my guests for their contribution, and especially you as always for listening. Join me again next Saturday morning for more from the world of business. But until then, have a profitable week.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast.